Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we travel farther south than almost any human being ever has, beyond the storms of the Southern Ocean, beyond the final shipping routes, beyond the last signs of ordinary civilization, to a continent that still feels untouched by time itself Antarctica, a place so cold, so isolated, so enormous that even today, we still do not fully understand what lies beneath its ice. And the deeper I looked into this frozen continent, the stranger it became. At first, I thought Antarctica was simply another remote wilderness, a giant desert of snow at the bottom of the earth, beautiful, dangerous, but ultimately empty. But then I started finding things that didn't quite make sense. Ancient maps that appeared to show Antarctica before it was covered in ice. Satellite images revealing shapes that looked disturbingly artificial. Stories of hidden lakes trapped beneath the continent for millions of years. Forests fossilized near the South Pole, strange red waterfalls flowing from glaciers like wounds in the ice, and perhaps most unsettling of all, uh, the feeling that Antarctica has somehow become the meeting point of every great mystery humanity has ever whispered about. Lost civilizations, forbidden expeditions, buried structures, Nazi missions, unexplained sightings, hidden worlds beneath the earth, and warnings about a future that may already be beginning. Now, I'm not here to tell you that every theory is true. Honestly, many of them probably are not. But the more time I spent studying Antarctica, the more I realized something that genuinely disturbed me. For a continent we claim to understand, there are still an incredible number of unanswered questions hidden beneath the ice. Questions about Earth's past, questions about forgotten history, and maybe questions about ourselves. So tonight, I want you to come with me, not as tourists, not as skeptics, and not as believers, but as curious travelers, exploring one of the last places on Earth that still feels truly unknown. Together, we'll journey through ancient maps, lost worlds, impossible ecosystems, secret military expeditions, strange objects seen from space, and the terrifying possibility that Antarctica may not only preserve Earth's forgotten past, but also reveal its future. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, let the world grow quiet around you, and together, let us step slowly into the frozen silence of Antarctica. There are certain places on Earth that feel distant, places that seem untouched by the modern world. But Antarctica has always felt different to me. Not just distant, not just dangerous, but almost unreal, like a continent that was never meant to fully belong to our world at all. I still remember the first time I saw real satellite images of Antarctica late one winter night, the screen glowing softly in the dark room, endless white stretching beyond the edges of the map. No cities, no roads, no ordinary signs of life, just ice, silence, and shadows hidden beneath storms older than memory itself. At first, I told myself it was simply curiosity, the same kind of fascination people have with the deep ocean or outer space, but the feeling stayed with me, and over time, it slowly turned into something closer to obsession. Because the more I learned about Antarctica, the less it felt like a normal place on Earth. It is the coldest continent on the planet, the driest desert in the world, the windiest place known to human beings, a land so hostile that even today, after all our technology, after satellites, aircraft, and modern science, huge parts of Antarctica remain almost completely unexplored. Entire regions have never been properly studied by humans. Beneath the ice are mountain ranges larger than the Alps, lakes trapped in darkness for millions of years, valleys hidden since long before the first human being ever walked the earth. And somehow, despite all of this, Antarctica rarely feels present in ordinary life. Most people never think about it, never question it, never wonder what truly exists there. And and maybe that is what unsettled me the most. Because for a continent larger than Europe, holding nearly 90% of the planet's ice, Antarctica feels strangely absent from human consciousness. almost as if the world quietly agreed to look away from it. I began noticing how different Antarctica was from every other place humans explore. The Amazon is studied constantly. Deserts are crossed by roads, mountains are climbed, oceans are mapped, but Antarctica remains locked behind layers of restriction, permits, treaties, dangerous weather, and endless isolation. Even reaching its coastline requires enormous effort, and beyond the edges visited by tourists, there stretches a frozen interior so vast and silent that it barely feels connected to the same civilization we live in. Sometimes, while staring at photographs of Antarctica late at night, I would try to imagine the silence there. Not ordinary silence, but the kind of silence so complete that you could hear your own heartbeat echoing beneath the wind. The kind of silence that makes a human being suddenly aware of how small they really are. And yet, despite all that emptiness, I could never shake the feeling that Antarctica was not truly empty. There was something about it that felt hidden, buried, waiting. Maybe it was the old explorer journals, the stories of men who claimed they felt watched in the snow. Maybe it was the strange satellite images that appeared online every few years before disappearing again into endless debates. Or maybe it was simply the realization that Antarctica preserves time differently than the rest of Earth, because beneath those glaciers, locked under kilometers of ancient ice, are worlds that have not seen sunlight for millions of years, forests older than humanity, rivers frozen in place, air from prehistoric ages, entire landscapes trapped beneath the continent like memories buried under stone. The deeper I went into Antarctica's history, the stranger the continent became. Because unlike other mysteries, Antarctica is not hidden in the past alone. It still exists right now, untouched, unfinished, unresolved. And perhaps that is why it unsettles so many people. We are used to believing the world has already been discovered, mapped, explained. But Antarctica refuses to fit comfortably into that idea. It remains one of the last places on Earth where uncertainty still survives, where science, myth, fear, and imagination blur together beneath the ice. And somewhere along the way, I started asking myself a question that I could never fully let go of. Why does the entire world seem so careful around this continent? Why does Antarctica feel less like a place humans belong and more like a place humans were only temporarily allowed to visit? Because sometimes, when I look at those endless white satellite images, I no longer see just snow and glaciers. I see the surface of something ancient, something buried, something waiting beneath the ice for the world to finally notice it. The moment that truly changed the way I looked at Antarctica was not a government document or an explorer's diary or even one of the old stories about hidden worlds beneath the ice. It was a photograph, a single satellite image that appeared online years ago, an image so strange that at first I honestly assumed it had to be fake. I remember staring at it late at night, zooming in closer and closer, trying to convince myself that what I was seeing was only a trick of light and shadow. But the shape remained there, cold, sharp, almost impossibly geometric against the endless white wilderness. A mountain, rising from the frozen landscape of the Ellsworth Mountains, with four steep triangular faces converging into a pointed peak, looking uncannily similar to the pyramids of Giza. The internet exploded almost immediately after the image spread. Some people laughed at it, others dismissed it without hesitation, but many could not stop staring at it, because even if the structure was natural, there was something deeply unsettling about how precise it looked from above. Antarctica already felt mysterious enough, but now there appeared to be a pyramid hidden beneath the snow at the bottom of the earth. And once I saw it, I could never completely forget it. Scientists quickly stepped forward with explanations. According to geologists, the formation was most likely a nunatak, a mountain peak exposed above the surrounding ice sheet. Over millions of years, violent Antarctic winds, freezing temperatures, and cycles of ice expansion and erosion could carve stone into sharp triangular forms. Similar peaks exist in other parts of the world, especially the Matterhorn in the Swiss Alps, which also appears pyramid like from certain angles. From a scientific perspective, the explanation made perfect sense. And honestly, part of me wanted to accept it immediately because the alternative felt too strange, too uncomfortable, too difficult to explain. But the longer I studied the images, the more questions began creeping into my mind. So, because this formation did not simply resemble a pyramid from one lucky angle, it appeared unusually symmetrical from multiple perspectives, almost deliberate, almost designed. And perhaps what unsettled me most was not the pyramid itself, but what it represented psychologically. Because the moment people saw that image, they immediately connected Antarctica to something ancient, something hidden, something buried beneath the ice. Suddenly, the conversation was no longer only about glaciers and climate science. It became about forgotten civilizations, lost history, and the terrifying possibility that humanity may not know its own past as well as we believe. I started comparing the Antarctic structure to pyramids across the world: Giza in Egypt, Teotihuacan in Mexico, the Bosnian pyramid claims in Europe, ancient stepped structures in Peru, and the similarities became difficult to ignore, not necessarily because they proved anything artificial, but because humanity itself has always seemed strangely obsessed with the pyramid shape. Across continents separated by oceans and thousands of years, different civilizations built structures reaching toward the sky using nearly identical geometry: wide bases, precise angles, alignment with cardinal directions. Why? Was it simply the strongest architectural form available to ancient builders? Or did the shape carry some deeper meaning that has since been forgotten? The Bosnian pyramids fascinated me especially because mainstream archaeologists strongly reject the idea that they are man made, yet supporters continue pointing to smooth slopes, symmetrical sides, and geometric alignment hidden beneath hills and forests. The debate itself reminded me of Antarctica because, in both cases, the argument was never only about rocks. It was about the possibility that traces of forgotten history might still exist beneath landscapes we assume are natural. And once that idea enters your mind, it becomes difficult to completely dismiss. The stranger thing is that the Antarctic pyramid was not the only unusual structure people began noticing. After the satellite images spread, online researchers started identifying other formations nearby: ridges with near perfect angles, snow covered hills appearing oddly square, dark openings resembling entrances carved into mountainsides. Some of these images were almost certainly illusions created by shadows and ice, but not all of them felt easy to explain away, at least not emotionally, because Antarctica itself amplifies mystery. Everything there feels larger, older, quieter, as though the continent exists slightly outside ordinary reality. And maybe that is what slowly changed me, because at first, I approached these images as a skeptic. I expected to debunk them one by one, to explain them rationally and move on. But instead, the deeper I explored Antarctica, the more I began asking a question that genuinely disturbed me. Why do so many strange shapes, strange stories, and strange coincidences seem to gather in the same place? Why Antarctica? Out of, out of all the continents on Earth, why does this frozen wilderness repeatedly become connected to lost civilizations, ancient maps, hidden structures, UFO theories, forbidden expeditions, and impossible discoveries beneath the ice? Um, Maybe there are perfectly reasonable explanations for every single image. Maybe the pyramid is only a mountain. Maybe the shapes are only geology. Maybe the mystery exists only in human imagination. But even now, when I look at that frozen peak rising from the Ellsworth Mountains, alone beneath the Antarctic sky, I cannot shake the feeling that the continent is trying to tell us something, not directly, not clearly, but through fragments, through patterns, through questions buried beneath the snow, waiting patiently for someone curious enough to keep looking. After the pyramid images spread across the internet, I told myself I would stop going deeper into the Antarctica rabbit hole. Honestly, I wanted to stop because the deeper I looked, the stranger everything became. At first, it was exciting in the way all mysteries are exciting. Late nights, old explorer journals, archived satellite images, endless theories scattered across forgotten corners of the internet. But slowly, curiosity began turning into something heavier because Antarctica no longer felt like a place filled only with natural wonders. It began feeling like a place where reality itself became uncertain. One night, while scrolling through high resolution satellite imagery of East Antarctica, I came across another image that made me stop completely. It appeared to show a massive dark opening carved into the side of a snow covered mountain. Not an irregular crack, not a chaotic natural fissure, but something disturbingly clean, almost rectangular, almost architectural. The opening cast a deep shadow into the ice, and the surrounding edges looked unnaturally straight against the rough Antarctic terrain. I remember zooming in again and again, trying to rationalize it, telling myself it was simply erosion, lighting, perspective. But the image stayed with me for days afterward because it looked less like a random cave and more like an entrance. And once that thought entered my mind, Antarctica became impossible to look at the same way again. Soon, I discovered I was far from alone. Thousands of people online had already begun collecting similar images from across the continent: dark openings in cliffs, enormous cave mouths hidden beneath glaciers, strange formations resembling giant staircases disappearing into mountains. Some images showed long, symmetrical ridges buried beneath snow. Others revealed shapes so geometric that they looked almost designed from above. Scientists, of course, offered explanations, and many of them were reasonable. Antarctica is shaped by brutal natural forces: ice expansion, freeze thaw erosion, collapsing glaciers, shifting rock beneath pressure older than human civilization itself. In such extreme conditions, as nature can sometimes produce forms that appear artificial to the human eye. Our brains are designed to recognize patterns, especially faces, structures, symmetry. We see meaning even where none exists. And honestly, I understood that. I still do. But the problem was never just one image, it was the accumulation of them. Because the farther I searched, the more Antarctica seemed filled with shapes that felt strangely out of place. I found images of formations resembling enormous stairways carved into icy slopes, layer after layer rising with near even spacing. Some researchers argued these were merely exposed sedimentary layers. Others claimed they were the result of melting patterns within ancient ice. But even then, I could not shake the strange emotional reaction they triggered because, from a distance, they looked eerily intentional, as though they belonged to ruins buried beneath thousands of years of snow. Then came the objects that people began calling UFO-like structures: oval shapes partially buried beneath the ice, dark metallic-looking anomalies casting shadows across frozen plains, long trails in the snow ending in massive unidentified forms. Most were likely rocks, distorted ice, or image artifacts from satellite stitching. Yet Antarctica somehow transformed even ordinary geological features into something haunting, because the continent itself already feels disconnected from ordinary reality. And perhaps that is why the mystery spreads so easily there. In another part of the continent, I found images people compared to enormous frozen doorways, towering openings framed by steep walls of ice and rock. Some appeared large enough for aircraft to pass through, others resembled entrances leading downward into darkness beneath glaciers. And while scientists explain that shifting ice often creates hollow chambers and exposed rock faces, I began noticing something that genuinely unsettled me: symmetry. Again and again, Antarctica seemed to produce formations that felt too balanced, too structured, too geometric. And eventually I found myself asking a question I never expected to ask. What if Antarctica is not only hiding history, but architecture? Not necessarily cities, not necessarily alien bases or lost civilizations, but traces, fragments, evidence that something once existed there before the ice buried everything beneath kilometers of frozen silence. Because the more I studied Antarctica, the more I realized something extraordinary. We often imagine ancient history as buried beneath deserts, jungles, or oceans. But Antarctica is different. Antarctica does not simply bury the past, it freezes it, preserves it, seals it away almost perfectly. If forests can survive beneath the ice for millions of years, if rivers and entire landscapes still exist trapped below glaciers, then what else might remain hidden there? And that thought stayed with me, especially late at night, staring into endless white satellite maps while storms moved slowly across the bottom of the world. Sometimes, the continent felt less like a natural place and more like the ruins of another age, covered so completely by ice that humanity forgot what once existed there. Maybe every doorway, every staircase, every strange formation has a perfectly ordinary explanation. Maybe they are nothing more than illusions created by nature and human imagination. But even now, I cannot fully dismiss the feeling that Antarctica is trying to reveal something through fragments, through shapes, through impossible geometry, emerging briefly from beneath the snow before vanishing again under storms and shifting ice. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was no longer simply researching Antarctica, I was descending into it. Deeper and deeper into a frozen labyrinth of questions, where every answer only seemed to uncover another mystery hidden beneath the ice. For a long time, the strangest thing about Antarctica to me was not the conspiracy theories, not the satellite images, not even the stories about hidden structures beneath the ice. It was the simple scientific fact that Antarctica was not always frozen. Because once I truly understood that, everything else began to feel possible. I remember sitting in silence the first time I read about fossilized forests discovered near the South Pole. Actual forests in Antarctica. At first, my brain almost rejected the idea automatically, because when we imagine Antarctica, we imagine endless white emptiness. Glaciers stretching toward the horizon, temperatures cold enough to freeze exposed skin within minutes, a world so hostile that life itself seems accidental there. But millions of years ago, Antarctica looked nothing like that. Incredibly, scientists have discovered fossilized tree trunks, ancient roots still embedded in soil, pollen trapped beneath layers of rock, and evidence of rivers and wetlands that once crossed the continent like veins through a living world. Some of these discoveries were made disturbingly close to the South Pole itself, which somehow made them feel even more impossible. I kept picturing it in my mind: forests growing beneath polar skies, rain falling where now there is only snow, ancient rivers moving slowly across landscapes that today lie buried beneath kilometers of ice. And the more I learned, the stranger Antarctica's past became. During certain periods of Earth's distant history, especially around 100 million years ago, Antarctica was warm enough to support dense forests filled with conifers, ferns, mosses, and prehistoric ecosystems unlike anything we associate with the continent today. Scientists studying fossil pollen and preserved plant material believe average temperatures may once have ranged between 13 and 20 degrees Celsius, warm enough for rivers, rainfall, and thriving plant life. Even more astonishing, these forests survived despite Antarctica already being located near the southern polar region, which meant months of darkness each year. Somehow, life adapted, flourished, endured. And honestly, I found that deeply haunting because it transformed Antarctica from a dead world into something far more emotional, a lost world, a continent that had once been alive. When explorers first discovered fossilized leaves during early Antarctic expeditions, many scientists initially struggled to believe the findings. Some assumed the samples had been contaminated or transported accidentally, but over time, the evidence became undeniable. Entire fossil forests had once existed there, not isolated trees, but ecosystems, complex environments preserved beneath the ice like memories trapped in stone. In certain areas, researchers even discovered upright fossilized trees still rooted where they had originally grown, frozen remnants of a vanished landscape that existed long before human civilization, long before recorded history. And once I realized Antarctica had once been green, truly green, another question slowly emerged in my mind. a question that became impossible to ignore. If Antarctica was once habitable, who or what might have lived there? Mainstream science gives a clear answer. Humans did not exist during most of Antarctica's warm periods. Modern Homo sapiens are far too recent, and the continent had already begun freezing long before human civilization appeared. Rationally, I understood that. But emotionally, the question still lingered, because Antarctica keeps creating this strange tension between science and imagination. The evidence proves the continent was once alive, rich with forests, rivers, and ecosystems, and yet today it feels utterly alien, as though an entire world vanished beneath the ice. Sometimes while studying maps of subglacial Antarctica late at night, I would imagine what the continent may have looked like before the glaciers arrived, valleys stretching toward distant coastlines, dark evergreen forests beneath pale polar sunlight, rivers winding through mountain ranges now hidden under frozen silence. It is difficult to explain, but there is something deeply unsettling about realizing that entire landscapes can disappear almost completely from human memory. Antarctica is not merely frozen, it is erased, buried so thoroughly that most people cannot emotionally connect the modern continent with the ancient living world beneath it. Then came the pollen discoveries, tiny fragments of prehistoric life buried deep within Antarctic sediments, microscopic evidence that grasses, shrubs, and tundra-like ecosystems survived there far longer than scientists once believed. In some regions, Antarctica may not have become fully frozen until relatively recently in geological terms, meaning parts of the continent remained exposed, alive, and changing long after earlier assumptions suggested otherwise. That detail stayed with me for weeks, because every new discovery seemed to push Antarctica further away from the image we grew up with, no longer a timeless frozen wasteland, but a continent with a forgotten history, a continent transformed by catastrophe. And perhaps that is what disturbed me most of all, because Antarctica suddenly stopped feeling permanent. If it could transform once, from forests to ice, then perhaps it could transform again. Suddenly, the glaciers no longer felt eternal, they felt temporary, like a veil covering something older beneath, something the world has not fully seen in millions of years. And somewhere deep within that realization, another thought quietly emerged, one that I could never completely silence afterward. If Antarctica once held rivers, forests, seasons, and the conditions for life, then maybe the greatest mystery is not why the continent froze, but whether something else disappeared there long before the ice arrived. Um, there are certain discoveries that stay with you long after you first encounter them, not because they prove anything with certainty, but because they quietly break something inside your understanding of history. For me, the Peary Race map was one of those discoveries. I still remember the first time I saw it, an old fragment of parchment covered in faded lines, coastlines sketched by hand more than 500 years ago, created in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Peary Race. At first glance, it did not seem extraordinary, just another ancient map from an age of exploration. But then I looked closer, and the deeper I looked, the more unsettling it became. Because, according to some researchers, hidden along the southern edge of the map was something that should not have existed, a depiction of Antarctica, not covered in ice, but drawn as if its coastline had once been visible to human eyes. The idea sounded absurd the first time I heard it. Honestly, I wanted to dismiss it immediately, because the implications felt too enormous. Antarctica was not officially discovered until the 19th century, and even then, its true landmass remained buried beneath kilometers of ice. Modern scientists only began understanding the continent's hidden geography through radar and seismic imaging in the 20th century. So, how could a map from 1513 appear to show parts of Antarctica without ice? The rational explanations came quickly. Many historians argue that the southern section of the map does not represent Antarctica at all, but simply a distorted extension of South America. Others believe the shapes were influenced by the ancient idea of Terra Australis, a hypothetical southern continent that medieval geographers imagined must exist to balance the world. And logically, these explanations make sense. Ancient maps were often inaccurate, coastlines stretched and warped, myth blended freely with geography. Yet, despite all of that, I could never completely shake the strange feeling the map gave me, because there was something disturbingly precise about certain portions of it, especially when later research began comparing the map's southern coastline to modern scans of Antarctica's buried landmass beneath the ice. That was when I first encountered the theories of Charles Hapgood. And honestly, that was the moment this mystery truly pulled me into the darkness of the Antarctica rabbit hole. Hapgood was not an explorer, nor a fringe conspiracy theorist shouting wild claims into obscurity. He was a historian, thoughtful, methodical, deeply fascinated by ancient maps and the possibility that human history might stretch further back than we realize. In the mid 20th century, Hapgood proposed a theory that sounded almost impossible. He believed that certain ancient maps, including the Piri Reis map, may have been copied from far older source maps created by a forgotten seafaring civilization. According to his theory, this civilization may have existed thousands of years before recorded history, during a time when parts of Antarctica were either ice-free or far less covered by glaciers than they are today. The moment I read that theory, I felt the same strange mixture of fascination and fear that Antarctica always seems to create. Because suddenly, the mystery was no longer only about geography, it became about memory, about the terrifying possibility that fragments of ancient knowledge survived longer than the civilizations that created them. Hapgood suggested that these ancient source maps may have been preserved, copied, translated, passed from one culture to another across centuries, from unknown civilizations to Phoenicians, to Greeks, to Arabs, eventually reaching cartographers like Piri Reis. The idea sounded almost unbelievable. And yet, the deeper I researched ancient navigation, the more complicated history became, because ancient civilizations were often far more sophisticated than modern people assume. The Egyptians aligned structures with astonishing astronomical precision. Polynesian navigators crossed vast oceans using stars and currents alone. Ancient mariners traveled farther than many historians once believed possible. So I found myself trapped between skepticism and wonder. Rationally, I knew there was no solid proof that an advanced prehistoric civilization had mapped Antarctica, but emotionally, I could not stop asking the same haunting question. How could ancient people describe coastlines hidden beneath ice that modern humans only rediscovered through advanced technology? Maybe it was coincidence, maybe distorted geography, maybe imagination layered over incomplete maps. But Antarctica has a way of turning even small uncertainties into enormous mysteries, because the continent itself already feels detached from ordinary history, isolated, preserved, forgotten. Sometimes late at night, I would stare at overlays comparing the Piri Reis map to modern Antarctic landforms beneath the ice, tracing coastlines with my eyes while storms moved slowly across satellite images of the frozen continent. And gradually, another thought began to emerge, one far more unsettling than the idea of lost maps. Because if Antarctica was once visible, once navigable, once free enough from ice for coastlines to be charted, then the world itself may have looked profoundly different not so long ago. Suddenly, ancient myths about floods, vanished lands, and civilizations destroyed by climate catastrophe no longer felt entirely symbolic. They began feeling like distorted memories surviving through fragments, through stories, through maps, through clues humanity barely understands anymore. And perhaps that is why the Piri Reis map continues haunting people centuries later, not because it proves ancient civilizations existed in Antarctica, but because it forces us to confront a terrifying possibility that human history may be far older, stranger, and far less complete than we have been taught. Even now, when I look at that weathered parchment, I no longer see only an ancient map. I see a question stretching across centuries, waiting beneath the ice. How could people from the ancient world possibly know the shape of a continent buried beneath kilometers of frozen silence? The deeper I went into Antarctica's mysteries, the more I realized something unsettling. The continent beneath the ice is not gone. It is still there, perfectly preserved, waiting in darkness beneath kilometers of frozen silence. And somehow, that idea disturbed me more than any theory about pyramids or hidden bases ever could. Because buried beneath Antarctica is not simply rock, but an entire ancient world, a landscape untouched for millions of years. I remember the first time I saw one of the radar scans created by scientists studying the continent. At first, it looked abstract, strange lines, shadows, invisible contours hidden beneath the ice sheet. But then the image slowly resolved itself into something recognizable: valleys, mountain ranges, river systems, entire networks of terrain buried under the frozen surface like the bones of another Earth. It was one of those moments where history suddenly stops feeling distant, because Antarctica no longer appeared as a blank white wilderness. It became a place with memory. Scientists using ice penetrating radar and satellite mapping have discovered enormous hidden landscapes beneath East Antarctica, regions the size of entire countries, preserved beneath the ice for at least 14 million years. And what shocked me most was how familiar some of those landscapes looked: rolling hills, winding river valleys, interconnected basins, plateaus shaped by ancient weather systems. They did not resemble an alien wasteland. They resembled parts of Europe, parts of Canada, places where life once moved freely beneath open skies. For millions of years, uh, these landscapes have remained sealed away under immense pressure and darkness, untouched by rain, untouched by erosion, untouched by human eyes, almost perfectly frozen in time. And honestly, the thought of that kept me awake some nights, because somewhere beneath Antarctica's glaciers, ancient rivers still exist in silence, not flowing, not alive, but preserved like a paused moment from another age of Earth. I began imagining what the continent must have looked like before the ice arrived: valleys covered in forests, rivers reflecting pale sunlight beneath long polar summers, wetlands stretching toward distant mountains now hidden below frozen deserts. And the more I imagined it, the more Antarctica stopped feeling like the end of the world and started feeling like the ruins of a forgotten beginning. But then I encountered another theory, one far more controversial and far more unsettling: true polar wander. Sometimes called crustal displacement, the theory suggests that Earth's outer shell may not always remain fixed in place, that over immense spans of time, continents themselves can shift dramatically relative to the planet's poles, pulling entire regions from warm climates into frozen darkness. Mainstream geology accepts that Earth changes slowly through plate tectonics. Continents drift, climates evolve, oceans rise and fall. But True Polar Wander proposes something more dramatic: the possibility that large portions of Earth's crust may have shifted more rapidly in the distant past, moving entire land masses into completely different climate zones. And once I connected that theory to Antarctica, everything became strangely difficult to ignore. Because suddenly, Antarctica's transformation no longer seemed gradual and distant. It began feeling catastrophic. Imagine a once living continent: forests, rivers, ecosystems, perhaps even early forms of civilization if one allows imagination to wander far enough, suddenly dragged toward the South Pole over unimaginable spans of time, swallowed by advancing ice, buried beneath glaciers, erased from human memory. It sounds almost mythological, and perhaps it is. Yet traces of these ideas appear repeatedly throughout human history: ancient flood legends, lost worlds consumed by catastrophe, civilizations destroyed when the Earth itself changed. I found myself reading theories from researchers like Charles Hapgood, who believed ancient maps and geological evidence hinted that Antarctica may once have occupied a warmer position on Earth. His ideas remain heavily debated, often rejected by mainstream scientists. Yet Antarctica itself seems to invite these questions, because the continent constantly blurs the line between established science and terrifying possibility. What disturbed me most was not the theory alone, but the emotional implication hidden inside it. Because if Antarctica truly transformed so completely from green wilderness to frozen tomb, then Earth itself may be far less stable than we emotionally believe. We think of continents as permanent, oceans as eternal, climates as predictable. But Antarctica whispers something very different. It whispers that worlds vanish, landscapes disappear, ecosystems die beneath ice, and entire chapters of Earth's story can be buried so completely that humanity barely remembers they existed at all. Sometimes, while staring at radar reconstructions of Antarctica's hidden terrain, I felt an almost surreal sadness because beneath that ice are valleys no wind has touched in millions of years, rivers no sunlight has seen since before humanity existed, entire landscapes trapped in geological silence, preserved with a stillness so absolute it barely feels real. Antarctica became something else to me then, not simply a continent, but a world suspended in time, a place where Earth's forgotten past still waits beneath frozen layers, untouched, unseen, unresolved. And perhaps that is why Antarctica affects people so deeply, because somewhere beneath the scientific data, beneath the radar scans, beneath the glaciers and theories, lies a haunting realization. The world we know today is only the latest version of Earth. And Antarctica may be one of the few places where the older world still survives, sleeping quietly beneath the ice, waiting for the day the frozen silence finally begins to thaw. The deeper I traveled into Antarctica's mysteries, the more I noticed something strange. The line between science and legend began to blur. At first, I tried to keep the two worlds separate in my mind. Fossils belong to science, maps belong to history, myths belong to imagination. But Antarctica has a way of pulling everything together into the same frozen silence. Until eventually, even the stories that sound impossible begin to feel strangely difficult to dismiss completely. That was exactly how I felt when I first encountered the prophecies of Edgar Cayce, known by many as the Sleeping Prophet. Cayce became famous in the early 20th century for entering trance like states and describing visions about human history, lost civilizations, spiritual knowledge, and future changes to the earth itself. Most people either completely believe him or completely reject him. And honestly, for a long time, I stayed somewhere in the middle, curious but skeptical. Um, Yet one prediction in particular stayed with me long after I first read it, because decades before Antarctica became central to modern climate discussions, Case claimed that the frozen continent would one day become green again. At first, the statement sounds almost poetic, symbolic even. But the unsettling part is that modern science now suggests parts of Antarctica really are warming faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. Glaciers are retreating, ancient ice shelves are collapsing, and researchers have already discovered signs of vegetation beginning to spread along the Antarctic Peninsula. Mosses, microorganisms, even hardy grasses appearing where once there was only ice. Suddenly, Casey's strange vision no longer felt entirely disconnected from reality. And that was the moment I started feeling genuinely uneasy, because Antarctica has this disturbing habit of forcing ancient myths and modern science into the same conversation. According to Case, dramatic shifts in Earth's climate and axis would one day transform the planet. Coastlines would flood, civilizations would struggle to survive, and Antarctica, long frozen and lifeless, would slowly awaken again. He described the possibility of ancient lands emerging from beneath the ice, lands hidden for unimaginable stretches of time. Now, rationally, there is no scientific evidence proving Casey possessed supernatural knowledge. His predictions remain controversial, symbolic, often vague. But emotionally, I could not ignore how strangely well Antarctica fit into his visions. Because beneath the ice, we already know another world exists: buried forests, ancient rivers, hidden mountain ranges, entire landscapes frozen beneath the continent like memories preserved in crystal. And once I accepted that Antarctica truly had a green past, another thought slowly began creeping into my mind. What if ancient humanity remembered fragments of that lost world? not through precise history, but through myths, stories, symbols, distorted memories passed down across generations until only legends remained. Throughout human civilization, nearly every culture carries stories about catastrophic floods, vanished lands, civilizations swallowed by disaster from Atlantis to ancient Mesopotamian flood myths, to stories preserved in indigenous traditions across the world. For years, I viewed these stories as symbolic reflections of human fear. But Antarctica complicated that certainty, because now we know Earth's climate has transformed dramatically many times before. Continents changed, oceans rose, ecosystems disappeared, entire worlds vanished beneath ice or sea. Suddenly, ancient catastrophe myths no longer felt entirely disconnected from geological reality. And perhaps that is what unsettled me most about Case's prophecies. Not whether he predicted the future, but whether humanity unconsciously remembers fragments of forgotten disasters from the distant past. Antarctica began feeling less like a continent and more like a sealed archive of Earth's hidden memory, a place where traces of older worlds still survive beneath the frozen silence. Sometimes late at night, I would imagine Antarctica before the ice, forests moving beneath polar winds, rivers cutting through valleys now trapped beneath glaciers. Perhaps even coastlines where life once gathered under skies no human being has seen in millions of years. And then I would think about Casey's prediction that one day the ice would retreat again, revealing what had long remained hidden. Honestly, there was something haunting about that idea, because if Antarctica truly begins turning green again, it would not simply be an environmental event, it would be the uncovering of another Earth, a forgotten continent returning slowly from beneath the ice. And perhaps that is why Antarctica affects the imaginations so powerfully, because it exists at the intersection of memory and mystery, science and prophecy, past and future. Every new fossil, every radar scan, every collapsing glacier seems to whisper the same uncomfortable truth, that the world we know is temporary, that climates shift, civilizations rise and fall, and entire chapters of Earth's story can disappear beneath catastrophe. I still do not know what to believe about Edgar Cayce. Maybe he was only a mystic, maybe his predictions were coincidence, maybe humanity simply sees patterns where it wants to see them. But somewhere along the way, as I kept studying Antarctica, I realized something inside me had changed, because the continent no longer felt like a place separated from myth. Instead, it began feeling like the reason myths exist in the first place, a place so ancient, so isolated, and so filled with buried memory that even legends seemed drawn toward it like echoes from a forgotten age. And for the first time, I started wondering whether some legends survive, not because they are literally true, but because somewhere deep beneath them, hidden under centuries of distortion, lies a fragment of something humanity once witnessed and never fully forgot. At some point during my journey into Antarctica's mysteries, I realized something unsettling. None of the individual discoveries frightened me on their own. Not the ancient maps, not the fossil forests, not the buried rivers beneath the ice, not even the theories about shifting poles and forgotten civilizations. What disturbed me was how all of them seemed to point toward the same possibility, that humanity may have forgotten something enormous about its own past. Because when viewed separately, each mystery has a reasonable explanation. Ancient maps can be distorted, fossils only prove climate change, geological shifts happen slowly over millions of years, myths are simply stories. But Antarctica changes when you place all of these pieces together. Suddenly, the continent begins to feel less like a random collection of mysteries, and more like fragments of a larger memory buried beneath the ice. I kept thinking about the Piri Reis map, that impossible southern coastline appearing centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered. Then the fossilized forests, ancient rivers, preserved landscapes hidden beneath kilometers of frozen silence. Then the theories of pole shifts, the possibility that Earth itself may once have transformed far more violently than we emotionally imagine. And finally, The ancient flood myths shared by civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years, stories of worlds destroyed, lands swallowed, civilizations erased. It was not any single theory that affected me. It was the accumulation of them, because Antarctica sits at the center of all these strange intersections: geology, mythology, climate catastrophe, forgotten history, and slowly, almost without realizing it, I began wondering whether Antarctica represents something much deeper than a frozen continent. Maybe Antarctica is humanity's forgotten memory, preserved beneath the ice because nowhere else on Earth remained untouched long enough to keep the evidence hidden. Sometimes, late at night, I would stare at reconstructed images of Antarctica before the ice sheets formed: green valleys, rivers cutting through mountain ranges, coastlines exposed to ancient oceans, and I would feel this strange emotional disconnection because it looked like a world humanity should remember, but doesn't. Almost everything about modern civilization is built on the assumption that recorded history is complete enough to explain who we are. We believe the timeline is mostly understood, primitive beginnings leading slowly toward modern society. But Antarctica introduces uncertainty into that confidence, because the continent constantly reminds us how easily entire worlds can vanish. Forests became glaciers, ecosystems disappeared, landscapes were buried so completely that humanity forgot they ever existed. If nature can erase entire continents beneath ice, then what else might have disappeared from memory? And perhaps that is why so many legends feel strangely connected to Antarctica. Atlantis, ancient catastrophes, pole shifts, lost civilizations, even stories about divine punishment and world floods. Maybe they survive because somewhere deep beneath the mythology there is a faint echo of something real, not necessarily in the literal details, but in the emotional memory of a world transformed by disaster. Antarctica began feeling less like a location and more like a warning, because the continent proves something profoundly uncomfortable. Earth changes dramatically, catastrophically. Entire environments vanish, climates collapse, species disappear, and the traces left behind can remain hidden for millions of years beneath ice and stone. I found myself thinking about future civilizations thousands of years from now. If our modern world disappeared beneath rising oceans, glaciers, volcanic winters, or climate collapse, what fragments of us would survive? Broken satellites buried beneath sediment, ruined cities beneath the sea, distorted myths passed down through survivors? Would future humans look at those fragments and dismiss them as impossible stories? Suddenly, ancient legends no longer felt childish to me. They felt human. Attempts to preserve memory after unimaginable loss, and Antarctica, silent and frozen at the bottom of the world, began feeling like the ultimate archive of forgotten catastrophe. Sometimes I wonder if that is the true reason the continent unsettles people so deeply. Not because of aliens, or secret bases, or hidden structures, but because Antarctica quietly forces us to confront how fragile civilization really is. Beneath the glaciers are reminders that Earth existed long before us, and will continue long after us. Rivers once flowed where now there is only ice. Forests once stood where now there are storms and frozen deserts. Entire ecosystems vanished almost completely from human awareness. And if such transformations happened before, they can happen again. That realization changed the way I looked at history itself, because history suddenly stopped feeling permanent. It became incomplete, fragile, filled with missing chapters we may never fully recover. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Antarctica is not what lies beneath the ice, but what humanity has forgotten about itself. Maybe ancient civilizations were never as simple as we assume. Maybe catastrophic climate shifts shaped human memory far more deeply than we realize. Or maybe Antarctica simply reveals how little we truly know about Earth's distant past. I still do not claim to know the answers. Honestly, the deeper I go into Antarctica, the less certain I become about anything. But one feeling continues growing stronger inside me every time I study this frozen continent: a quiet, persistent realization that human history may be far older, stranger, and far more incomplete than we are comfortable admitting. And somewhere beneath the endless Antarctic ice, beneath the silence, beneath the preserved landscapes and forgotten rivers, there may still remain traces of chapters humanity has not yet remembered. Because sometimes when I think about Antarctica long enough, I no longer feel like I'm looking at the edge of the world. I feel like I'm looking at the edge of forgotten history itself, and the terrifying possibility that history as we know it may only be part of the story. At first, I believed Antarctica's greatest mysteries were hidden on the surface: the strange mountains, the impossible maps, the frozen landscapes buried beneath the glaciers. But eventually, I discovered something even more unsettling. Antarctica is not empty underneath the ice. In fact, beneath the frozen continent exists an entire hidden world: lakes, rivers, ecosystems, places that have remained sealed away from the rest of Earth for millions of years. And honestly, the deeper scientists drilled into Antarctica, the stranger the continent became. I still remember the night I first learned about Lake Vostok. At the time, I assumed Antarctica was frozen solid from top to bottom, an endless mass of ancient ice resting on lifeless rock. But then I discovered that nearly 4 kilometers beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, hidden under unimaginable pressure and darkness, lies one of the largest freshwater lakes on Earth. A lake so isolated that it may have remained completely sealed off from the atmosphere for 15 to 25 million years. Think about that for a moment. Before the first humans existed, before the rise of civilization, before entire mountain ranges finished forming, this hidden body of water was already trapped beneath the Antarctic ice, untouched, silent, preserved beneath a frozen world no human being had ever seen. And what disturbed me most was not simply the lake itself, but the realization that Antarctica had been hiding it all along. When Russian scientists finally reached Lake Vostok in 2012 after drilling through the ice for more than a decade, it felt almost surreal, like humanity breaking into another world. They drilled carefully, terrified of contaminating an ecosystem that may have evolved in complete isolation for millions of years. And but when the drill finally pierced the hidden lake, pressurized water surged upward through the borehole before quickly freezing in the Antarctic air. And for a moment, it felt as though the continent itself had breathed. I remember staring at photographs from the expedition late at night, overwhelmed by the scale of what existed beneath the ice, because Lake Vostok was not alone. Scientists eventually discovered that Antarctica contains not just one hidden lake, but hundreds. Entire networks of subglacial lakes connected by underground rivers flowing silently beneath the frozen continent. Some lakes are enormous, large enough to swallow entire cities. Others fill and drain slowly over centuries, like hidden reservoirs buried beneath the earth. And suddenly, Antarctica stopped feeling like a continent. It began feeling like another planet. The strangest part is that these lakes remain liquid, not because of sunlight, but because of geothermal heat rising from deep within the earth, combined with the crushing pressure of the ice above. In total darkness beneath kilometers of ancient glaciers, hidden rivers continue flowing through Antarctica's buried world. Rivers no human eye has ever seen, ecosystems existing in isolation beyond anything ordinary life on Earth experiences, and somehow life survives there. That was the moment Antarctica truly changed for me, because until then, I still imagined the hidden world beneath the ice as empty, silent, dead. But scientists began finding microbial life inside some of these lakes, microorganisms surviving without sunlight, without normal oxygen, feeding instead on minerals and chemical reactions deep beneath the frozen continent. Entire ecosystems evolving in total isolation for geological ages. Honestly, the idea terrified me in a quiet way because it proved something extraordinary. Antarctica is not dead. It only appears dead from the surface. Beneath the ice, something is still alive. Sometimes late at night, I would imagine those hidden waters beneath Antarctica, vast black lakes sealed in eternal darkness, silent rivers moving beneath glaciers older than human civilization. strange microorganisms drifting through untouched ecosystems hidden beneath the bottom of the world. It felt almost impossible to emotionally process because these places are so isolated that they barely belong to the same Earth we live on. In some ways, they resemble the hidden oceans. Scientists suspect exist beneath the icy crusts of Europa or Enceladus, moons orbiting distant planets. And suddenly, Antarctica became more than a continent of ancient history. It became a glimpse into the possibility of life surviving in places humanity once believed impossible. The deeper researchers explored, the stranger everything became. Radar scans revealed flowing waterways beneath the glaciers, hidden channels carrying water across enormous distances. In some areas, lakes appeared to pulse slowly, filling and draining over years through underground systems no one fully understands. Antarctica was no longer static, no longer frozen in the way we imagine. Beneath the surface, the continent was moving, breathing, alive in silence. And perhaps that is what unsettled me most of all, because Antarctica constantly destroys the illusion that we understand our own world completely. We think of Earth as mapped, explored, explained, yet beneath the Antarctic ice exists a hidden world humanity only recently discovered. A world older than our species, untouched by sunlight, preserved beneath kilometers of frozen time. Sometimes I wonder how many other worlds exist beneath the surface of our planet. Forgotten ecosystems, buried landscapes, entire environments hidden from ordinary human experience. Antarctica feels less like the end of the Earth and more like a doorway into how much remains unknown. Because the deeper scientists drilled beneath the ice, the stranger Antarctica became. And the more I began to realize that the continent may not simply be hiding the past, it may be hiding forms of life, histories, and realities that humanity has barely even begun to understand. The more I learned about Antarctica, the more I realized how wrong our image of the continent truly is. We imagine it as empty, lifeless, frozen beyond the reach of biology itself, a dead continent buried beneath ancient ice. But the truth emerging from scientific expeditions is far stranger because Antarctica is not dead at all. It is alive, quietly, invisibly, hidden beneath the ice in forms that almost seem impossible. And honestly, that realization changed the way I looked not only at Antarctica, but at life itself. The first discoveries were microscopic, tiny organisms hidden in places where no sunlight had reached for millions of years. Microorganisms trapped beneath glaciers, living inside frozen lakes, sealed away from the atmosphere long before humanity existed. Scientists expected sterile darkness beneath the Antarctic ice. Instead, they found ecosystems, strange biological systems surviving under conditions that should have killed almost anything. These organisms became known as extremophiles, life forms capable of surviving in environments so hostile they barely resemble Earth at all. Some live without oxygen, others feed on sulfur, iron, or minerals dissolved deep beneath the glaciers. Instead of sunlight, they survive through chemical reactions in total darkness. And the more scientists studied them, the stranger everything became, because these were not dying remnants barely holding on. Many of them were thriving, adapting, evolving, creating entire ecosystems hidden beneath the frozen continent. I remember reading about these discoveries late one night, staring at images of Antarctic drilling sites while snow fell quietly outside my own window, and I felt this strange sense of unease because Antarctica was beginning to feel less like a frozen wasteland and more like a hidden biosphere, a secret living world operating beneath the surface of the Earth without humanity ever noticing. Then I discovered Lake Enigma. And honestly, that was one of the moments Antarctica truly stopped feeling ordinary to me. Hidden beneath thick Antarctic ice, Lake Enigma revealed bizarre microbial structures unlike anything researchers expected to find. Strange mats of living microorganisms spread across the lake bed, formations resembling carpets, branching patterns, almost tree-like biological systems growing slowly in eternal darkness. Some microbes cooperated with each other, exchanging nutrients in delicate relationships, while others appeared parasitic. feeding from neighboring organisms in ways scientists still struggle to fully understand. It was not merely life, it was complexity, ecosystems evolving in complete isolation beneath one of the harshest places on Earth. And what disturbed me most was the realization that these systems may have existed undisturbed for millions of years, hidden while entire civilizations rose and collapsed on the surface world above. Antarctica began feeling almost layered, as though beneath the visible frozen continent existed another Earth entirely, a biological underworld moving silently through darkness beneath the glaciers. The deeper scientists explored, the stranger Antarctica's living systems became. In some cases, as ice shelves cracked apart due to climate change, hidden ecosystems were suddenly exposed to human eyes for the first time in centuries, or even longer. Researchers discovered giant sea spiders, octopuses, ancient corals, fish thriving beneath shelves of ice where sunlight had never reached. Entire communities of organisms surviving through nutrient flows carried slowly beneath the frozen ocean. It felt impossible, almost dreamlike, because these creatures existed in complete darkness, isolated from the surface world, evolving quietly beneath the Antarctic ice while humanity remained unaware they were there at all. One discovery affected me more than any other. A research team drilling through the Filchner ice shelf accidentally found a massive boulder deep beneath the ice covered with strange stationary organisms, sponges, filter feeders, unknown life forms attached to stone hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest sunlight. Scientists admitted they had no idea how these creatures survived. Nutrients should not have reached them. The environment should have been too hostile, and yet life persisted there anyway. Slowly, Antarctica began changing the way I understood biology itself, because the continent proved something extraordinary. Life does not simply survive in comfortable environments, it adapts, it waits. It transforms itself to endure conditions that seem impossible. And perhaps that is why Antarctica feels so emotionally unsettling, because beneath the ice, life continues in silence without us, ancient, hidden, patient. Sometimes, I would close my eyes and imagine the hidden ecosystems beneath Antarctica, black rivers flowing slowly under glaciers, microbial colonies drifting through unseen lakes, strange organisms feeding in darkness where no human being has ever stood. It no longer felt like science fiction. It felt real, terrifyingly real. Antarctica stopped resembling a dead continent. Instead, it became a hidden living world, one humanity only recently discovered by accident. And perhaps the strangest part of all is this: we still have almost no idea how much life remains hidden beneath the ice. Vast regions of Antarctica have never been drilled, never explored, never mapped in detail. Entire ecosystems may still exist below the glaciers, isolated for geological ages, evolving according to rules humanity barely understands. The deeper scientists drilled, the more Antarctica transformed from a frozen graveyard into something far stranger, a world alive beneath the ice, breathing quietly beneath the silence of the coldest continent on Earth. And sometimes, when I think about those hidden organisms surviving in darkness older than human history, I cannot shake the feeling that Antarctica is trying to teach us something, not only about the planet, but about life itself. That even in the coldest, darkest, most isolated corners of existence, life continues to endure, hidden, waiting beneath the ice. There are moments in Antarctica's story where science becomes so strange, so visually disturbing, that it almost feels supernatural even when you know the explanation. And and for me, nothing captured that feeling more than Blood Falls. I still remember the first time I saw a photograph of it. A massive stream of deep crimson liquid pouring from the face of a glacier into the white Antarctic snow. It looked impossible, almost violent, as though the continent itself had been wounded and was bleeding into the frozen desert. Against the endless silence of Antarctica, the color felt wrong, unnatural, terrifyingly alive. For decades, Blood Falls became one of the most haunting mysteries on the continent. Hidden deep within the McMurdo Dry Valleys, one of the coldest and driest places on Earth, the strange waterfall flows from the Taylor Glacier. staining the ice with thick red streaks visible even from a distance. At first glance, it looks like something from another planet, or perhaps something buried beneath the glacier trying to emerge through the ice. And honestly, when I first saw it, part of me understood immediately why so many strange theories surrounded Antarctica, because blood falls does not look like a normal natural phenomenon. It looks like a secret. The scientific explanation, strangely enough, is almost as unsettling as the mystery itself. Millions of years ago, before Antarctica became fully frozen, the region around Taylor Glacier was covered by ocean water. As the climate changed and glaciers advanced, pockets of ancient saltwater became trapped beneath layers of ice, sealed away from the atmosphere, isolated in darkness beneath the glacier for unimaginable spans of time. Over millions of years, the trapped water became rich with iron and minerals dissolved from the surrounding rock. Today, pressure beneath the glacier slowly forces this iron-heavy brine upward through cracks in the ice. And when the liquid finally reaches the surface, the iron reacts with oxygen in the air, oxidizing like rust, turning the water blood red. Rationally, the explanation is beautiful, elegant even. Geology, chemistry, time. But emotionally, blood falls still feels deeply wrong because the idea itself is haunting. Ancient water trapped beneath Antarctica for millions of years, slowly emerging from beneath the glacier like something waking from sleep. And then came the detail that disturbed me most of all. The water beneath Blood Falls is alive. Scientists studying the hidden brine discovered microorganisms surviving within the ancient trapped ecosystem. Microbes existing without sunlight, without oxygen, feeding instead on sulfur and iron compounds dissolved within the dark water. Alien-like life forms hidden beneath Antarctica's ice, surviving under conditions that resemble environments scientists expect on distant icy moons orbiting other planets. Suddenly, blood falls stopped feeling like a geological curiosity. It became a doorway into a hidden biological world. Because these organisms evolved in complete isolation beneath the glacier, untouched by the surface world for millions of years. Antarctica once again proved that life survives in places humanity once believed impossible. But unlike the microbial discoveries beneath Lake Vostok, Blood Falls carried a darker emotional tone, perhaps because it was visible, exposed, almost theatrical against the Antarctic landscape. It looked less like science and more like evidence of something ancient buried beneath the ice. And naturally, the theories began spreading. Some people claimed Blood Falls was connected to hidden underground structures beneath Antarctica, secret facilities buried below the glaciers, forgotten bases hidden in the darkness beneath the continent. Others believed the red water might be leaking from biological experiments. Ancient ecosystems disturbed by unknown activity below the ice. Rationally, I understood these theories lacked evidence, but Antarctica has a way of making even ordinary explanations feel incomplete because every scientific discovery there somehow sounds like the beginning of a horror story. Ancient water trapped for millions of years, strange organisms feeding without sunlight, rivers flowing beneath glaciers, ecosystems hidden in eternal darkness. The continent itself almost feels alive beneath the ice, sometimes late at night. I would stare at photographs of blood falls for far too long. The crimson water against the frozen white landscape looked almost symbolic, as though Antarctica itself was trying to reveal something buried deep below the surface. And perhaps that is what unsettled me most. Because blood falls shattered the illusion that Antarctica is static, silent, frozen in time. In reality, beneath the glaciers, water still moves, microorganisms still evolve, chemical reactions continue in darkness beyond human sight. Antarctica is active, hidden processes unfolding constantly beneath the ice, processes humanity barely understands. The deeper I went into Antarctica's scientific mysteries, the darker the continent began to feel, not because of monsters or conspiracies, but because reality itself was becoming stranger than fiction. Hidden ecosystems, underground rivers, ancient microorganisms surviving without sunlight, lakes untouched for millions of years. Antarctica no longer resembled a dead continent. It resembled a sealed world, operating according to rules humanity had only just begun to uncover. And Blood Falls became the perfect symbol of that hidden world because it felt like Antarctica briefly exposing something from beneath its frozen surface. Not enough to fully reveal the truth, only enough to remind us that something ancient, alive, and deeply mysterious still exists beneath the ice. Sometimes I wonder whether that is why Antarctica fascinates people so powerfully, because every new discovery there carries the same unsettling message. The world beneath the ice is not empty, it never was. And the deeper we look into Antarctica, the stranger the darkness beneath it becomes. The longer I explored Antarctica, the more I began to understand something unsettling about the continent. It does not only challenge science, it challenges the human mind itself. Because Antarctica is not merely cold, it is psychologically immense. Endless white horizons, months of darkness, silence so complete it almost feels physical, isolation powerful enough to distort a person's sense of reality. And perhaps that is why so many strange stories seem to emerge from the frozen edges of the world, because Antarctica has always been a place where fear, imagination, and the unknown begin blending together beneath the ice. At first, I dismissed many of these stories completely: sea monsters, ghost ships, unexplained sightings in the Antarctic waters. They sounded like the kind of legends sailors have invented for centuries while staring into storms and darkness. But Antarctica has a way of slowly changing your certainty, because even the irrational stories begin to feel emotionally believable there, especially when surrounded by a continent that already feels so alien. One of the strangest legends I encountered was the story of the Ningen, a mysterious creature reportedly seen by crews aboard Japanese research vessels in Antarctic waters. Witnesses described something pale, enormous, almost human in shape, rising silently from the freezing ocean before disappearing beneath the waves again. Some accounts claimed the creature was 30 meters long, with smooth white skin blending into the surrounding ice. Others described arms, hands, and a face disturbingly human, blank eyes, a wide mouth, expressionless features staring silently across the dark water. Rationally, I understood the likely explanations: drifting ice formations, whales glimpsed through storms, exhausted minds creating patterns in darkness. Yet even so, the image stayed with me, because Antarctica already feels like a place where unknown life might still survive, hidden beyond human reach. Giant squid inhabit the Southern Ocean. Creatures so massive they inspired the ancient kraken myths long before modern science confirmed their existence. Entire ecosystems remain unexplored beneath Antarctic waters, and suddenly, the idea of something enormous and unidentified moving silently through the freezing ocean no longer felt entirely impossible. Antarctica has a way of stretching the imagination toward fear. Perhaps because the continent itself already feels older than human civilization, untouched by ordinary reality, isolated enough that almost anything seems capable of existing there. The deeper I went into Antarctic history, the darker the stories became. Not only sea creatures, but ghost stories, explorer accounts, strange sensations experienced by people who spent too long beneath the polar silence. One story affected me more than almost any other: the experience of Sir Ernest Shackleton during his desperate Antarctic expedition. In 1916, after unimaginable hardship, Shackleton and two companions crossed South Georgia Island in a brutal journey through frozen mountains and exhaustion. Later, Shackleton described a strange sensation during the trek: the overwhelming feeling that a fourth person was walking beside them, even though only 3 men were present. What disturbed me most was that his companions later admitted they had felt it too. The phenomenon became known as the third man factor, a strange psychological experience reported by explorers, survivors, and people pushed to the edge of human endurance. Scientists explain it as a coping mechanism of the mind under extreme stress, and perhaps they are right. But Antarctica makes even psychological explanations feel eerie, because The continent itself seems capable of reaching inside human perception, altering it, reshaping it beneath the endless isolation. Then I discovered the story of the Jenny, and honestly, that story haunted me for weeks afterward. According to old accounts from the 19th century, a whaling ship discovered another vessel trapped deep within Antarctic ice, frozen completely motionless, abandoned to the silence of the polar sea. When the crew boarded the ship, they reportedly found the sailors still inside, frozen where they sat, preserved by the cold as though time itself had stopped. The captain's final log entry supposedly read, "No food for 71 days. I am the only one left alive." Whether every detail of the story is true or not almost stopped mattering to me, because emotionally, it perfectly captured what Antarctica feels like, a place capable of swallowing human beings so completely that they simply vanish into silence. I began noticing how often Antarctic explorers describe similar sensations, feelings of being watched, footsteps in empty snow, voices carried across the wind, shadows moving near isolated research stations. Most scientists attribute these experiences to isolation, sensory deprivation, endless darkness or endless daylight, the psychological strain of existing in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And honestly, that explanation makes sense. But Antarctica still feels uniquely capable of amplifying fear because the continent strips away the normal distractions of human civilization, leaving people alone with silence, cold, and the terrifying awareness of how small they really are. Sometimes, I think Antarctica frightens people not because of what is there, but because of what the continent awakens inside the human mind. In Antarctica, the world feels unfinished, uncertain, ancient, and and when humans stand in places that ancient, imagination naturally begins filling the silence. Sea monsters emerge from dark water, ghost ships drift through frozen storms, pale creatures rise silently beneath the ice. Explorers feel invisible presences walking beside them in the snow. And perhaps none of these stories are literally true. Perhaps they are reflections of the mind trying to survive overwhelming isolation. But even now, after everything I have learned, I cannot completely dismiss the feeling that Antarctica changes people, that something about the continent itself presses against the edges of human perception. Because the longer you stare into Antarctica's endless white silence, the more the ordinary world begins feeling distant, and the more possible the impossible starts to become. In the end, perhaps that is Antarctica's greatest mystery. Not hidden creatures, not ghost stories, not even what lies beneath the ice, but the strange way the continent quietly transforms fear, memory, loneliness, and imagination into something that feels almost alive within the human mind. Up until this point, Antarctica's mysteries still felt connected to science. Strange science, perhaps, unsettling science, but science nonetheless. Fossils, hidden rivers, impossible ecosystems beneath the ice, ancient maps hinting at forgotten worlds. Everything still existed somewhere between geology, climate history, and human imagination. But then I reached the stories surrounding Nazi Germany and Antarctica. And honestly, that was the moment the continent stopped feeling like science and started feeling like secrecy. Because once I entered that chapter of Antarctica's history, the atmosphere changed completely. Suddenly, the stories became darker, more paranoid, filled with military expeditions, missing records, hidden motives, and whispers about things buried beneath the ice that governments were never meant to find. It began in 1938. Just before the Second World War exploded across Europe, Adolf Hitler authorized an Antarctic expedition to a remote region of Queen Maud Land. Officially, the mission had practical goals. Germany needed access to whale oil, an important industrial resource at the time, and Antarctica's surrounding waters were rich with whaling opportunities. On paper, it sounded almost ordinary. Another geopolitical expedition during an era of aggressive territorial expansion. But Antarctica has a way of making ordinary explanations feel incomplete, especially when secrecy surrounds them. The German expedition departed aboard the vessel Schwabenland, carrying scientists, naval officers, technicians, and Nazi officials south into one of the least explored regions on Earth. Once they reached Antarctica, the crew launched aircraft over the frozen landscape, photographing enormous stretches of the continent from above. Drop. They dropped aluminum markers stamped with swastikas across the ice, claiming the territory for the Third Reich under the name Neuschwabenland, or New Swabia. And perhaps if the story had ended there, history would remember it only as another strange geopolitical mission before the war. But the mystery deepened after the collapse of Nazi Germany, because rumors began spreading that the real purpose of the expedition had never been fully revealed. According to some theories, the Nazis were searching for something hidden beneath Antarctica. Others claimed they intended to establish secret underground facilities far from Europe, hidden beneath the ice where no enemy nation could easily reach them. At first, I dismissed these ideas immediately. They sounded exaggerated, almost cinematic. But then I started reading about Antarctica itself, endless unexplored territory, hidden cave systems, geothermal regions beneath the ice, isolated mountain ranges buried from the outside world. And slowly, I understood why the theories survived for so long. Because Antarctica genuinely feels like one of the few places on Earth where something could remain hidden indefinitely. What disturbed me most was not the theories alone, but the strange historical coincidences surrounding them. After World War II ended, German submarines began appearing unexpectedly in South America months after Germany's surrender. U-boats like U-530 and U-977 arrived in Argentina under mysterious circumstances. Their crews offered incomplete explanations for their long journeys through the South Atlantic. And naturally, rumors exploded almost immediately. Some people believed the submarines had transported high-ranking Nazis or secret cargo to hidden Antarctic outposts before surrendering. Others claimed advanced technology had disappeared into underground bases beneath New Swabia. Rationally, I knew there is no verified evidence proving secret Nazi cities exist beneath Antarctica, no confirmed underground bases, no hidden armies frozen beneath the glaciers. Yet Antarctica itself continued feeding the mystery, because unlike most conspiracy theories, the setting felt disturbingly believable. Endless ice, unmapped regions, underground heat sources, enormous cave systems hidden beneath glaciers, the coldest and most isolated continent on Earth. Sometimes, late at night, I would stare at maps of Queen Maud Land while reading fragments of expedition reports from the 1930s and 1940s, and slowly, Antarctica stopped feeling like a natural landscape. It began feeling like a stage, a place where history itself disappeared beneath silence. I noticed something else too. Um, Nazi Germany was deeply fascinated not only with military technology, but also with myths, ancient civilizations, occult symbolism, hidden knowledge. Groups like the Thuthul Society and other circles within the Nazi sphere believed humanity's origins and forgotten powers might be connected to lost civilizations hidden from the modern world. Suddenly, Antarctica became the perfect backdrop for those obsessions. A continent ancient, see, isolated, buried beneath ice, disconnected from ordinary civilization, a place where anything could be imagined or hidden. And perhaps that is why the New Swabia expedition became one of Antarctica's darkest legends, because it arrived at the perfect intersection of secrecy, war, mythology, and human fear. The more I explored this chapter of Antarctic history, the more uncomfortable I became, because unlike ancient myths, this happened recently. Within modern history, documented expeditions, military operations, disappearing records, unexplained submarine movements, Antarctica suddenly stopped feeling distant from our world and started feeling connected to hidden parts of modern history we still do not fully understand. Even now, I cannot say what the Nazis truly hoped to find beneath Antarctica's ice. Perhaps nothing more than territory and resources, perhaps only military advantage, perhaps something stranger. But one thing changed permanently for me after studying those expeditions. Antarctica no longer felt like a place explored for knowledge alone. It began feeling like a place nations approached with secrecy, caution, and hidden intentions. And that realization transformed the continent into something far darker. Because once Antarctica becomes connected to war, hidden technology, and geopolitical secrecy, the ice itself begins feeling less like nature and more like a curtain hiding something the world was never supposed to see. If the Nazi expeditions to Antarctica were the moment the continent began feeling secretive, then Operation High Jump was the moment the mystery became truly unsettling. Because unlike the scattered rumors surrounding New Swabia, Operation High Jump was real, enormous, officially documented, and led by one of the most famous polar explorers in modern history, Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Even now, decades later, the operation remains surrounded by strange questions that never seem to disappear completely. I remember the first time I began reading about it. At first, it sounded straightforward. In 1946, only months after the end of World War II, the United States launched the largest military expedition ever sent to Antarctica. Officially called Operation High Jump, the mission involved over 4,000 personnel, 13 ships, aircraft carriers, submarines, helicopters, and dozens of military aircraft. The scale alone immediately caught my attention because this was not a small scientific survey. It looked more like preparation for war. Why would the United States send such an enormous military force to one of the most remote places on Earth so soon after the most devastating war in human history? Official explanations stated that the mission focused on training troops for extreme cold conditions, testing equipment, mapping the Antarctic coastline, and establishing research infrastructure. And rationally, those reasons made sense. The Cold War was beginning. Nations feared future conflicts in polar environments. Antarctica represented strategic territory. But the deeper I looked into the details, the stranger everything became. The operation was scheduled to last many months, yet it ended far earlier than expected, officially because of harsh weather and deteriorating conditions. And of course, Antarctica truly is dangerous enough to destroy even modern expeditions. Storms can appear without warning, temperatures collapse instantly, ice can swallow entire ships, but rumors surrounding High Jump grew almost immediately after the fleet returned home. Stories spread claiming Byrd's forces had encountered something unexpected beneath the Antarctic ice. Some whispered about advanced flying craft, others about hidden bases or underground civilizations. Most historians dismiss these stories entirely, and honestly, many of them almost certainly became exaggerated over time. But Antarctica has a way of amplifying uncertainty. Because the continent itself already feels like a place where hidden things could exist beyond ordinary understanding. What disturbed me most was not the wildest theories, but Byrd himself, because over the years, fragments of interviews and alleged diary entries began circulating online. Some were almost certainly fabricated, others remain endlessly debated. In one famous interview after Operation High Jump, Byrd warned that future wars could involve aircraft capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Officially, he was likely referring to emerging military aviation technology, yet conspiracy theories transformed the statement into evidence of secret Antarctic encounters, hidden civilizations, advanced Nazi craft, unknown aerial phenomena. The stories multiplied endlessly. And perhaps the reason those stories survived for so long is because Antarctica itself already feels disconnected from normal reality. The continent is large enough, isolated enough, and unexplored enough that almost any mystery feels emotionally possible there. Then came the stories about warm regions beneath the ice, geothermal zones hidden below Antarctica where temperatures remain surprisingly stable, caves warmed by underground volcanic activity, lakes remaining liquid beneath kilometers of frozen ice. Scientifically, these places absolutely exist. Antarctica is geologically active in certain regions. Volcanoes lie buried beneath the continent. Geothermal heat flows upward beneath glaciers, creating pockets where ice melts from below. Yet once these discoveries entered public imagination, the theories exploded again. Hidden warm caverns, underground lakes, large enough to support ecosystems, tunnels beneath the mountains. Suddenly, Antarctica no longer looked like a frozen wasteland. It looked like a continent with secret layers hidden beneath the surface. And perhaps that is why Operation High Jump became one of the most enduring Antarctic mysteries, because it arrived at the perfect intersection of military secrecy, unexplored territory, post war paranoia, and a continent already overflowing with unanswered questions. Sometimes, late at night, I would stare at old photographs from the expedition, enormous warships trapped among icebergs, aircraft flying above endless white emptiness, crews standing against Antarctic winds beneath skies that seemed almost unreal. And slowly, I began realizing something deeply unsettling. Antarctica changes the emotional meaning of everything placed upon it. Military operations become secret wars, scientific discoveries become hidden truths, isolated caves become underground civilizations. The continent itself transforms uncertainty into myth. But perhaps the strangest part of Operation High Jump is not what happened there. It is the fact that humanity still seems unable to fully let go of the mystery surrounding it. Because even today, decades later, people continue searching for answers hidden beneath Antarctica's ice. What did Byrd truly see there? Why did the mission feel so secretive? Why does Antarctica continue attracting stories about hidden technology, underground worlds, and encounters humanity struggles to explain? I still do not know the truth. Honestly, the deeper I go into Antarctica, the less certain I become about what is real and what has grown from fear and imagination. But one feeling remains impossible to shake. Operation High Jump marked the moment Antarctica stopped feeling like the edge of the Earth and started feeling like a place where nations, militaries, and perhaps even history itself were hiding something beneath the ice. Something buried deep enough that even now, humanity still cannot stop wondering what truly exists in the frozen silence below. At some point during my descent into Antarctica's mysteries, I crossed a strange line internally, a line where the questions stopped being only about hidden landscapes, lost civilizations, or secret military operations and started becoming questions about reality itself. Because eventually, if you follow enough Antarctic mysteries far enough, you arrive at one of the oldest and strangest ideas humanity has ever imagined: the possibility that another world exists beneath our own. I remember the exact night I first read the alleged diary passages connected to Admiral Byrd. The room was dark, except for the soft glow of my screen, snow falling outside my window, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, Antarctica no longer felt like a continent. It felt like a doorway. According to the stories that spread online decades after Byrd's expeditions, he allegedly encountered something impossible while flying over Antarctica, regions of unexpected warmth, landscapes hidden beneath the ice, lush valleys where there should have been only frozen emptiness. Some versions of the story describe advanced beings living within the Earth itself. Others speak of an inner civilization warning humanity about war, especially nuclear weapons. Now, I need to be honest, historians strongly dispute these diary stories. Many researchers believe they were fabricated long after Byrd's real expeditions, and there is no verified evidence proving Admiral Byrd entered a hidden world beneath Antarctica. Rationally, I understand that completely, but Antarctica has a way of making even impossible stories feel emotionally difficult to dismiss, because the continent already feels disconnected from ordinary reality. Endless ice, hidden geothermal zones, unexplored caverns, underground lakes, mountain ranges buried beneath kilometers of frozen silence. It is the perfect landscape for ancient fears and forgotten myths to survive. And perhaps that is why the legend of Agartha be so intertwined with Antarctica. Agartha, sometimes called Agarthy, appears in various esoteric traditions as a hidden subterranean kingdom beneath the earth, a secret civilization existing beyond ordinary human sight. Some stories describe it as spiritually advanced, peaceful, ancient beyond imagination. Others portray it as a hidden remnant of lost worlds destroyed long ago on the surface. Different versions place entrances to Agartha beneath Tibet, the Arctic, South America, and eventually Antarctica. The moment I encountered these stories, I assumed they were modern fantasy inspired by science fiction and occult mythology. But then I discovered something far stranger. Nearly every major civilization throughout history seems to preserve myths about worlds beneath the earth. Ancient Greeks spoke of underground realms hidden beneath mountains. Norse mythology described hidden worlds below reality. Buddhist legends mention subterranean kingdoms. Native American traditions tell stories of ancestors emerging from beneath the earth. Even Mesopotamian myths contain references to hidden realms beneath the surface world. The details differ, the symbolism changes, yet the pattern remains strangely consistent. Civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years repeatedly imagined hidden worlds beneath our own. And eventually, I found myself trapped by a question I could not fully answer. Why? Why do so many cultures describe worlds beneath the earth? Rational explanations exist, of course they do. Caves, tunnels, volcanic systems, the human fear of darkness, symbolic myths representing the subconscious mind, ancient burial rituals connecting death with underground realms. All of those explanations make sense. Yet Antarctica complicated everything again, because unlike ordinary continents, Antarctica genuinely contains enormous hidden spaces beneath the ice, underground rivers, geothermal caverns, buried lakes, unexplored mountain systems. Entire hidden environments exist there beyond direct human observation. Suddenly, the idea of unknown regions beneath the earth no longer felt entirely symbolic. Not necessarily civilizations, not necessarily Agartha, but hidden worlds in the literal sense. Places humanity has barely explored, places isolated beneath the surface for unimaginable stretches of time. Then came the nuclear warnings, one of the strangest recurring themes connected to the bird legends and hollow earth theories. In several versions of the story, the hidden beings beneath Antarctica supposedly warned humanity about nuclear weapons, claiming modern civilization was approaching dangerous technological power without spiritual wisdom. Honestly, part of me wanted to dismiss this immediately as post-war mythology shaped by Cold War fears. But another part of me noticed something uncomfortable. Almost every era creates myths reflecting its deepest anxieties. And perhaps Antarctica became the perfect canvas for those fears because the continent itself already feels detached from civilization, isolated enough to project humanity's hidden fears onto it. Sometimes, late at night, I would stare at Antarctic topographic maps showing hidden mountain ranges beneath the ice, valleys untouched for millions of years, strange geothermal anomalies beneath frozen deserts, and I would feel this unsettling emotional tension between skepticism and wonder. I did not truly believe there were ancient civilizations beneath Antarctica, yet I also could not completely silence the strange feeling that humanity understands far less about the Earth than we pretend to. Antarctica constantly creates that emotional instability, the sense that beneath the ice, beneath the silence, beneath the official explanations, something older may still exist hidden from view. Perhaps not Agartha, perhaps not a hollow earth civilization, but mysteries profound enough to awaken the oldest fears and legends buried within the human imagination. And maybe that is why these stories endure generation after generation. Not because people truly believe there are cities beneath Antarctica, but because somewhere deep inside us, humans have always sensed that the world contains hidden layers beyond ordinary understanding. Hidden places, forgotten histories, invisible worlds beneath the surface of reality itself. Even now, I do not claim the legends are true. Honestly, I remain deeply uncertain about all of it. But Antarctica changed something in me, because the continent forced me to confront how little humanity truly knows about its own planet. And once you accept that, even the oldest myths begin to feel slightly less impossible. Sometimes, when I think about Antarctica long enough, I no longer see only ice. I see a veil stretched across something ancient, silent, and still waiting beneath the frozen skin of the earth. By the time I reached the deepest layers of Antarctica's modern legends, I realized something strange had happened to the continent in the human imagination. Antarctica was no longer simply a place, it had become a convergence point, a frozen crossroads where every modern mystery eventually seemed to lead. Nazis, hidden technology, UFOs, ancient civilizations, underground worlds, unexplained aerial phenomena, all of it somehow drifted south toward the endless white silence at the bottom of the Earth. And honestly, that was the moment Antarctica stopped feeling like geography altogether and started feeling like mythology reborn through modern fears. It began with the strange obsession certain Nazi occult groups had with hidden knowledge before and during World War II. Organizations connected to esoteric circles inside Germany became fascinated with ancient civilizations, lost energy sources, secret powers, and myths about superior beings hidden from ordinary humanity. Groups like the Vril Society and the Thule Society became surrounded by rumors claiming they searched for ancient technologies and forgotten wisdom buried somewhere beyond the modern world. Historians debate how much of these stories are exaggerated, and many claims about the Vril Society were likely mythologized long after the war. Yet the emotional power of the stories survived because they perfectly matched Antarctica's atmosphere: isolated, hidden, ancient, unreachable. The idea that secret expeditions searched Antarctica for lost knowledge felt disturbingly believable there. Then came one of the strangest legends of all: Die Glocke, the bell. According to post-war rumors, Nazi scientists developed a mysterious experimental device shaped like a massive metallic bell. Some claimed it generated strange energy fields. Others believed it was connected to anti-gravity research, dimensional experiments, or early flying disc technology. Rationally, there is no verified evidence supporting the wildest versions of these stories, and many historians view them as conspiracy mythology created after the war. But Antarctica again complicated the emotional boundary between fact and imagination, because if any place on Earth could hide impossible technology beneath the ice, it would feel like Antarctica. Endless frozen territory, buried caves, inaccessible mountains, regions almost no human being has explored directly. The continent itself becomes part of the legend. Then I began reading about the wave of UFO sightings that spread after World War II, and something immediately caught my attention. Antarctica appeared repeatedly in the stories. Pilots, researchers, naval personnel, strange lights over the Southern Ocean, unidentified objects moving impossibly fast near Antarctic airspace, luminous disks vanishing into storms above the ice. Some sightings were almost certainly atmospheric phenomena, military misidentifications, or ordinary aircraft distorted by extreme polar conditions. Yet Antarctica's isolation gave these stories unusual power, because unlike crowded modern cities, Antarctica remains one of the few places where unexplained objects can disappear into emptiness without easy answers. The deeper I looked, the stranger it became. Online archives filled with satellite anomalies, dark triangular shapes beneath the snow, elongated objects half buried in ice, circular formations visible from above. Some people claimed Google Earth accidentally captured crashed UFOs hidden beneath Antarctica's glaciers. Others pointed toward bizarre images resembling giant faces emerging from the mountains. One formation became infamous online as the Antarctic alien face, an enormous shadowed rock formation whose features appeared disturbingly human when viewed from certain angles. Rationally, I understood the phenomenon immediately: pareidolia, the human brain instinctively finding familiar shapes in random patterns. We see faces in clouds, animals in mountains, meaning in chaos. And yet, Antarctica changes the emotional experience of these images because the continent already feels alien, ancient, unfinished. Every strange shadow there seems amplified by the silence surrounding it. Sometimes, late at night, I would scroll across endless Antarctic satellite maps, zooming into mountains buried beneath snowstorms, tracing strange geometric shapes across the frozen surface. And slowly, Antarctica stopped feeling like part of the ordinary Earth entirely. It felt like a continent disconnected from modern reality, a place where all unresolved mysteries drifted together like fragments pulled toward the same magnetic center. And perhaps that is why theories about buried craft became so widespread, because Antarctica genuinely hides things extraordinarily well. Entire mountain ranges remained undiscovered beneath the ice until modern radar revealed them. Hidden lakes survived untouched for millions of years. Underground rivers flow silently beneath glaciers. Ecosystems evolved unseen in darkness older than human civilization. Once you understand that, the idea of hidden objects beneath Antarctica no longer feels emotionally impossible. Not because there is evidence of alien spacecraft, but because the continent itself constantly reminds humanity how much remains hidden there. What disturbed me most was not any single theory, but the pattern itself. Why does Antarctica repeatedly become linked to every modern mystery imaginable? UFOs, secret weapons, underground civilizations, ancient maps, hidden technology, lost worlds, unexplained creatures. The same continent keeps appearing at the center of them all. Maybe the answer is psychological. Antarctica is the last truly unknown frontier on Earth, and humans naturally project their fears and fantasies into the unknown. Maybe that is all this is. But honestly, the deeper I explored Antarctica, the harder it became to dismiss the strange emotional gravity surrounding the continent. Because Antarctica does not behave like an ordinary place in the human imagination. It behaves like a void, a blank space onto which humanity projects its deepest fears, hopes, myths, and unanswered questions. In the end, perhaps Antarctica's greatest mystery is not whether hidden craft or secret technologies exist beneath the ice. Perhaps the true mystery is why humanity feels compelled to believe they might. Why the continent exerts such strange psychological power over the modern world. Because somehow, against all logic, Antarctica became the convergence point of every modern mystery, a frozen landscape where science, paranoia, mythology, war, and imagination merge together beneath the endless Antarctic sky. And sometimes when I stare long enough into those endless white satellite images, I cannot shake the feeling that the continent itself understands exactly what it is doing, remaining silent, remaining hidden, while humanity continues projecting its darkest questions onto the ice. The deeper I traveled into Antarctica's mysteries, the more I realized something profoundly strange about the continent. The entire world seems to behave differently there. Nations that compete everywhere else on Earth cooperate in Antarctica. Militaries that project power across oceans step back in Antarctica. Territorial disputes that would normally ignite conflict are frozen into uneasy silence beneath the Antarctic Treaty. And honestly, the longer I studied that treaty, the more unsettled I became, because Antarctica feels less like a normal continent and more like a place humanity collectively agreed to treat with unusual caution. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1959 during one of the most tense periods in modern history, the Cold War, a time when the United States and the Soviet Union stood locked in nuclear rivalry. Nations raced to expand military power. Intelligence operations spread across the globe, suspicion defined international politics, and yet, somehow, Antarctica became one of the few places where major world powers agreed to cooperate peacefully. The treaty declared that Antarctica would be used only for scientific purposes. Military activity was banned, nuclear testing prohibited, territorial claims effectively suspended. On the surface, it sounds hopeful, almost beautiful. Humanity choosing peace at the bottom of the world. And perhaps that truly is the reason. Perhaps Antarctica represents one of humanity's rare moments of wisdom. But Antarctica has a way of turning even ordinary explanations into unsettling questions because the more I studied the restrictions surrounding the continent, the stranger it began to feel. Access to Antarctica is heavily controlled. Travel requires permits. Scientific stations operate under international oversight. Enormous regions remain inaccessible to ordinary people. Harsh conditions naturally limit exploration. Yet the restrictions themselves create an atmosphere of secrecy around the continent, especially online. Some people believe the Antarctic Treaty exists primarily to protect fragile ecosystems, and scientifically, that makes complete sense. Antarctica is extraordinarily vulnerable. Contamination could destroy ecosystems hidden beneath the ice for millions of years. Geopolitical competition could devastate one of the last untouched regions on Earth. Rationally, I understand all of that. But emotionally, Antarctica still feels different because, unlike any other continent, the world treats Antarctica almost like a protected mystery. And eventually, I found myself asking a question that quietly refused to disappear. Why does the world cooperate so carefully, only in Antarctica? The deeper I looked, the more unusual the continent became. Military operations are tightly restricted, commercial development heavily controlled, even simple independent exploration becomes extremely difficult in many regions. Satellite coverage contains gaps and distortions that fuel endless speculation online. Some areas are rarely photographed publicly. Others remain almost untouched due to weather and remoteness. Naturally, conspiracy theories thrive in that environment. Hidden bases, underground research, buried technologies, secret discoveries concealed beneath the ice. I do not claim these theories are true, honestly. Many likely emerge from fear and imagination amplified by the continent's isolation. Yet Antarctica itself continuously creates the emotional conditions that allow those suspicions to survive, because secrecy feels believable there. Sometimes, late at night, I would stare at maps of Antarctica and realize how little humanity truly interacts with most of the continent. Vast regions remain almost entirely empty of permanent human presence. Storms erase tracks within hours. Temperatures can kill exposed people in minutes. The interior is so hostile that survival itself becomes uncertain. Antarctica naturally hides things, not necessarily because governments are concealing them, but because the continent itself is built to preserve silence. And perhaps that is why public suspicion surrounding Antarctica continues growing, because humans instinctively distrust blank spaces, unexplored regions, hidden places beyond ordinary observation. We live in an age where satellites can photograph nearly every city street on Earth, yet Antarctica still feels unreachable, unfinished, beyond full human control. The treaty itself became emotionally fascinating to me because it almost resembles an agreement to keep Antarctica separate from the rest of human civilization, a continent dedicated to science, peace, and restricted access, isolated from military conflict and ordinary geopolitics. On paper, it represents one of humanity's greatest acts of international cooperation. Yet emotionally, it also feels strangely fragile, almost tense, as though beneath the calm scientific language lies an unspoken understanding that Antarctica is too important, too dangerous, or perhaps too unknown to allow ordinary competition there. Then I began reading about proposals for future Antarctic mining, concerns about hidden resources beneath the ice, rare minerals, fossil fuels, strategic territory. Suddenly, the treaty felt even more temporary because as the ice melts and technology advances, humanity's pressure on Antarctica will almost certainly increase. And that thought disturbed me deeply because the continent already feels like one of the last untouched archives of Earth's hidden past, a frozen memory preserved beneath silence. What happens when the world begins reaching more aggressively into that silence? Sometimes, I wonder if Antarctica frightens humanity in ways we barely understand, not because of aliens or hidden civilizations, but because the continent reminds us how little control we truly have over the planet. Antarctica exists beyond ordinary civilization, beyond comfort, beyond easy explanation. And perhaps that is why nations treat it so carefully. Because somewhere beneath the diplomacy, beneath the treaties, beneath the scientific stations and restrictions, humanity recognizes that Antarctica is different, not simply another piece of land, but something closer to a threshold, a place where the known world begins fading into mystery. Even now, after everything I have learned, I still cannot fully answer the question that keeps returning to me whenever I look at Antarctica. Why does the world cooperate so carefully there? Maybe the answer is entirely practical. Maybe the continent simply demands cooperation to survive. But sometimes, when I look at the endless white silence surrounding Antarctica, I cannot shake the feeling that humanity approaches the continent carefully for another reason entirely, because somewhere deep beneath the ice, beyond the storms, beyond the treaties and scientific stations, Antarctica still feels like a place hiding truths the world is not fully prepared to uncover. The longer I explored Antarctica, the more I realized the continent is not only a mystery about the past, it may also be a warning about the future. Because beneath all the stories about hidden civilizations, ancient maps, and buried worlds, Antarctica quietly holds something even more important: the future stability of life on Earth itself. And honestly, that realization frightened me far more than any conspiracy theory ever could. For years, Antarctica felt emotionally distant from ordinary life, too remote, too frozen, too disconnected from human civilization to matter directly. But modern science increasingly describes Antarctica in another way entirely, not as the end of the world, but as Earth's warning system, a giant frozen laboratory silently recording the health of the entire planet. Every layer of Antarctic ice contains trapped air from ancient atmospheres, frozen memories of Earth stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Scientists drill deep ice cores into the continent and uncover traces of volcanic eruptions, climate collapses, carbon levels, temperature shifts, ancient storms. Antarctica preserves Earth's environmental history with terrifying precision, almost like the planet itself keeping a diary beneath the ice. And the deeper researchers study that frozen archive, the more unsettling the patterns become, because Antarctica is changing faster than humanity once believed possible. Ice shelves are cracking, glaciers retreating, temperatures rising across vulnerable regions, ecosystems shifting beneath the frozen silence. Some scientists describe Antarctica as the most important climate monitoring system on Earth, because changes there eventually affect coastlines, oceans, weather systems, and ecosystems across the entire planet. Suddenly, Antarctica no longer feels isolated from us. It feels connected to every future city, every coastline, every human life. Yet what unsettled me most was not simply the climate science, but how fragile Antarctica's hidden ecosystems truly are. Beneath the ice exist microbial worlds isolated for millions of years, ecosystems that evolved without contact with the outside world, organisms surviving in darkness under conditions unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. Scientists now worry that increased human activity, warming temperatures, and accidental contamination could permanently alter environments that remained untouched since before humanity existed. Antarctica is one of the last places on Earth where ancient biological systems still survive almost completely isolated from civilization. And once those systems are disturbed, they may never return to what they were. Then came another disturbing possibility, one that initially sounded like science fiction: the fear of invasive or alien species entering Antarctica's fragile ecosystems. As temperatures slowly rise, species from other parts of the world may begin surviving in regions once protected by extreme cold. Microorganisms, insects, plants, even marine species transported accidentally by ships or warming oceans. Antarctica's isolation has preserved it for millions of years, but that isolation is weakening, and suddenly the continent begins to feel vulnerable in a way that deeply unsettled me, because Antarctica is not built to adapt quickly to outside biological invasion. It evolved in separation, in silence, in cold stability. And now humanity may be forcing change into one of the last untouched ecosystems on Earth. Scientists often call Antarctica a natural laboratory, a place where humanity can study climate systems, ice dynamics, ancient microorganisms, and even conditions resembling alien worlds beyond Earth. NASA and other space agencies study Antarctic extremophiles because they may resemble forms of life capable of surviving beneath the icy crusts of moons like Europa or Enceladus. In some ways, Antarctica already feels more like another planet than part of our own. Frozen deserts, endless darkness during winter, hidden oceans beneath ice, strange organisms surviving without sunlight. It is both ancient Earth and a possible preview of other worlds humanity may someday explore. But perhaps the most haunting discovery connected to Antarctica was the ozone hole. I remember learning about it as a child, scientists discovering a massive thinning in Earth's protective ozone layer above Antarctica. At the time, it sounded abstract, environmental, distant, but later I realized something deeply symbolic about it. Even the atmosphere above Antarctica was warning humanity that something was wrong. The continent became one of the first places where humanity clearly saw the global consequences of industrial activity affecting the planet itself. And strangely, Antarctica responded almost like a Livingstone sending distress signals into the sky. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how Antarctica silently records everything humanity does. Greenhouse gases trapped in the ice, pollution carried by global winds, warming oceans beneath glaciers. Even microplastics have now been discovered in Antarctic environments once believed untouched. The continent preserves evidence of humanity's impact with terrifying honesty, because unlike cities, Antarctica cannot hide change beneath noise and distraction. Every fracture, every melting shelf, every shifting ecosystem becomes visible against the frozen silence. And perhaps that is why Antarctica feels emotionally overwhelming to me now, because it is no longer only a mystery about hidden history. It has become a mirror reflecting humanity's future, a place showing how fragile civilization and the natural world truly are. The ice beneath Antarctica holds memories older than humanity. Yet the future of that ice may now depend on humanity itself. And somewhere inside that realization, the continent became even more haunting than before. Because Antarctica is not simply hiding secrets beneath the ice, it is quietly revealing warning signs about the future of the Earth. Warning signs humanity may still not fully understand. Sometimes, when I look at Antarctica now, I no longer see only mystery. I see a fragile world balanced at the edge of transformation, a final, untouched place carrying the weight of an entire planet's future beneath its frozen silence. For most of human history, Antarctica felt eternal, a continent beyond change, beyond civilization, beyond time itself. Endless ice stretching toward the horizon, storms older than memory, glaciers so vast they seemed permanent in a way mountains and oceans feel permanent. But the deeper I studied Antarctica, the more I realized something profoundly unsettling. The ice is no longer stable. The frozen silence at the bottom of the world is beginning to move, crack, collapse. And honestly, I think humanity still does not fully understand what that means. I remember the first time I watched satellite footage of an Antarctic ice shelf breaking apart, enormous walls of ice collapsing into the ocean like fragments of another world, shattering in slow motion. Some of the icebergs were larger than entire cities, pieces of Antarctica that had remained frozen for thousands of years suddenly drifting into open water. The scale felt almost impossible for the human mind to process, because Antarctica operates on geological time. Yet now, changes are happening within a single human lifetime. Scientists warn that parts of the West Antarctic ice sheet may already be approaching irreversible instability. Glaciers thinning from below as warmer ocean water slowly eats away at the ice. Some regions are melting far faster than earlier climate models predicted. And perhaps what unsettled me most was the realization that Antarctica's future is directly connected to every coastline on Earth. If major sections of Antarctic ice collapse, global sea levels could rise dramatically. Cities, ports, entire coastal communities across the world would eventually face transformation. Suddenly, Antarctica no longer felt distant. The continent became connected to the future of civilization itself. The West Antarctic ice sheet haunted me especially because, unlike the massive East Antarctic system, parts of West Antarctica rest on bedrock below sea level, meaning warmer ocean water can penetrate beneath the glaciers and destabilize them from underneath. Invisible changes happening slowly beneath the frozen surface, almost like the continent melting from within. The more I learned about these processes, the more Antarctica began feeling fragile in a way I never expected, because for so long, the continent symbolized permanence. Now it feels vulnerable, changing, uncertain, Temperatures across parts of Antarctica have already risen significantly in recent decades. Some regions of the Antarctic Peninsula are warming faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. Ice shelves that survived for thousands of years have collapsed within weeks. Lakes of meltwater now appear on ice surfaces once thought too cold to thaw. And perhaps the strangest part of all, tiny signs of green life are beginning to spread again. Mosses expanding, microorganisms thriving in newly exposed environments, traces of vegetation slowly appearing where there was once only endless white silence. And suddenly, one of Antarctica's oldest mysteries returned to my mind. The idea that this frozen continent was once green before. Forests, rivers, ecosystems, an entirely different world hidden beneath the ice. For years, that ancient Antarctica felt emotionally disconnected from the modern one, separated by millions of years and impossible spans of time. But now, as temperatures rise and the ice retreats, the two worlds begin feeling strangely connected, almost as if the ancient continent buried beneath the glaciers is slowly trying to return. Sometimes, late at night, I would stare at climate reconstructions of Antarctica's distant past beside modern satellite imagery of melting ice shelves, and I would feel this unsettling overlap between history and future, because the continent is beginning to resemble its ancient self again. Not fully, not yet, but enough to awaken something deeply uncomfortable. Antarctica turning green no longer sounds entirely impossible. And once that thought settles into your mind, another question inevitably follows. What happens if humanity someday begins living there? It sounds almost absurd at first, a continent once considered too hostile for permanent civilization. Yet scientists and futurists increasingly discuss the possibility that warming temperatures, advancing technology, and geopolitical pressure could eventually transform Antarctica into a place of long-term human habitation. Research stations already exist. Underground facilities continue expanding, nations quietly strengthen logistical capabilities across the continent. If parts of Antarctica become more accessible in the future, the pressure to exploit resources, establish colonies, or claim strategic territory may become overwhelming. And honestly, uh, that idea disturbed me deeply because Antarctica still feels like one of the last truly untouched places on Earth. A frozen archive preserving ancient ecosystems, climate history, and perhaps forgotten chapters of the planet's past. The thought of modern civilization spreading aggressively across the continent feels almost tragic. Yet history suggests humanity rarely leaves accessible territory untouched for long. Sometimes I wonder if Antarctica represents the final threshold, the last great wilderness standing between the modern world and complete planetary transformation. Because once the ice truly begins disappearing, Antarctica will no longer remain emotionally distant from civilization. It will become part of humanity's future, economically, politically, environmentally, perhaps even culturally. And that realization changes everything. Because Antarctica stops being merely a mystery hidden at the bottom of the world, it becomes a countdown, a slow transformation already unfolding beneath the ice. Every collapsing glacier, every warming season, every patch of emerging green life feels like a signal from the future, a reminder that the frozen world humanity assumed eternal is already changing. And perhaps that is Antarctica's most terrifying secret of all. Not hidden civilizations, not buried technologies, not even the mysteries beneath the ice, but the realization that the continent itself is awakening, slowly, silently. And once that transformation truly begins, the future of humanity may change with it. When I first began looking into Antarctica, I thought I was exploring a remote continent, a frozen wilderness at the bottom of the world, distant from ordinary human life, isolated from history, almost irrelevant to the modern world outside scientific expeditions and drifting icebergs. But somewhere along the journey, something changed. Antarctica stopped feeling like a place on a map and started feeling like a question humanity has not yet answered. Because the deeper I traveled into its mysteries, the more the continent revealed itself as something far stranger than simple ice and snow. Antarctica became a buried memory, a hidden archive, a mirror reflecting humanity's fears, hopes, forgotten histories, and uncertain future all at once. We began with ancient maps, impossible coastlines sketched centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered, questions about who may have seen the continent before the ice consumed it. We uncovered fossil forests, ancient rivers, traces of a green world hidden beneath glaciers millions of years old. We followed the strange possibility that Earth itself may once have changed more violently than modern civilization is comfortable imagining. Then we descended beneath the ice into hidden lakes sealed away in darkness longer than human history itself. Ecosystems surviving without Ecosystems surviving without sunlight, microorganisms evolving in silence beneath kilometers in pressure. Antarctica stopped feeling dead, instead revealed itself as a hidden living world, ancient, patient, still breathing beneath the ice. And then came the darker stories. Blood falls bleeding from the glacier like a wound in the frozen continent. Um, Explorer accounts filled with fear and isolation. The strange psychological weight Antarctica places on the human mind. Legends of creatures moving beneath black Antarctic waters. Stories of ghost ships frozen in silence. By then, the continent no longer felt entirely real to me. It felt almost mythological, like a place where human imagination and reality begin dissolving into one another beneath the endless polar sky. Then the mysteries shifted again. Secret expeditions, Operation High Jump, hidden bases, underground worlds, rumors of advanced technologies and unexplained encounters buried beneath Antarctica's ice. Rationally, I know many of these stories likely grew through fear, paranoia, and decades of speculation. Yet emotionally, Antarctica somehow absorbs every mystery humanity projects onto it, because the continent itself remains unfinished in our minds, unexplored enough, isolated enough, silent enough, that almost anything still feels possible there. And perhaps that is Antarctica's greatest power, not what it reveals, but what it allows humanity to imagine. But in the end, the deepest mystery was never really about Nazis, UFOs, pyramids, or buried civilizations. The deepest mystery was always time, because Antarctica preserves time differently than the rest of Earth. Beneath its ice are ancient climates, forgotten ecosystems, air older than civilization, landscapes untouched for millions of years. The continent exists like a frozen memory of another world, a version of Earth humanity barely remembers, and now, slowly, that memory is beginning to awaken again. The ice is melting, temperatures are rising, ecosystems are shifting, green life slowly returns to places once buried beneath endless snow. Antarctica is changing before our eyes, and with it, humanity's future may be changing too. Rising seas, collapsing glaciers, fragile ecosystems exposed after millions of years. The continent no longer feels distant from civilization. It feels connected to every coastline, every city, every future generation. Antarctica is no longer simply a mystery hidden at the edge of the world. It may become one of the defining forces shaping humanity's survival in the centuries ahead. Sometimes, late at night, I think about everything hidden beneath Antarctica's ice, forgotten rivers, silent mountain ranges, strange microbial worlds, ancient landscapes untouched since before human existence. And I realize something profoundly unsettling. Humanity still understands remarkably little about its own planet. We like to believe the world has already been discovered, mapped, explained. But Antarctica quietly reminds us that enormous mysteries still remain, hidden beneath silence, waiting beneath the frozen skin of the Earth. Maybe that is why the continent affects people so deeply, because Antarctica represents the last great unknown, not only geographically, but emotionally, spiritually, historically. It forces us to confront how fragile civilization really is, how incomplete our history may be, how temporary our understanding of the world truly remains. And perhaps somewhere beneath all the myths, all the conspiracies, all the fear and fascination lies a simpler truth. Antarctica humbles us. It reminds humanity that there are still places older than our civilizations, quieter than our technology, and more mysterious than our explanations. Places where the Earth itself still keeps secrets. Even now, After everything I have learned, after every map, every theory, every hidden lake and buried landscape, I still cannot fully explain why Antarctica feels so different from every other place on Earth. But I know this. Whenever I look into the frozen silence of that continent, I no longer feel like I am looking at the end of the world. I feel like I am looking at something waiting patiently beneath time itself, something ancient, unresolved, listening quietly beneath the ice while humanity struggles to understand its own story. And maybe, just maybe, Antarctica was never truly silent. Maybe we simply weren't ready to listen.